Thank you, choir. That was beautiful. Oh, let's take another breath together. Do you ever get kind of sucked into the YouTube video vortex? That happened to me this week. People send me links to things. I click on them, and then one thing kind of leads to another. Right? Yeah. So first this week, it was the toddler Christmas pageant that went rogue. They took the baby Jesus right in the middle of some choir singing some beautiful thing. The congregation, congregation singing Away in a Manger very sweetly, and one of the toddlers grabbed the baby Jesus out of the manger and wanted to be in the spotlight. Well, the other characters in the story did not think that was the right thing to do. So there ensued the little toddler war of tugging on the baby Jesus, trying to get him back in the manger. I thought it actually was an apt metaphor for the battle that goes on among Christians who has the real Jesus, right? And then this video led down the road to Jimmy Kimmel, asking random kids about the Christmas story, listening to them trying to explain the story of Mary and Joseph. It was absolutely hilarious. I was in my office all by myself, crying until tears were coming down my face. I was laughing so hard. Because if they didn't know the answer to the question, they would unashamedly make one up. And they would just fill in the blank. Like, for instance, they knew there were 3 wise men, but they had no idea what frankincense and myrrh were. Well, who does anyway, right, really? When asked about Jesus' cousin, the little girl just answered with confidence and said, "Who was Jesus' cousin?" "Mike." That same little girl got it right, though, that Mary had a baby and named him Jesus. Actually, she was quite proud of herself, and then was asked, "Well, what happened next?" And straight-faced, she said, "Well," she looked up and thought a minute, "Santa came and picked him up, put him under the tree, and then everyone had a feast." Well, you got to admit it, it's a confusing story, isn't it? How it all goes together or doesn't. There are really 2 tales of Christmas, and we get them all tangled up at times. But what is important is to find the heart of it all, the core message, and let that message guide us together. The spirit of the season is found in our gift giving, in bringing light into the darkness, in remembering the wandering people looking for a home. That meaning can be found in a myriad of ways, even in a moment where we're singing a well-known carol that we've sung 100 times, and all of a sudden it has new meaning. It's said that this year, more than ever, people are listening to Christmas music. So I guess I'm of the opinion is however you tell the story and however it gets tangled up, we need to reclaim whatever meaning we can to help right ourselves, because surely we have been thrown off course this year. Anybody with me so far? You know, it came out a couple weeks ago that there's a list of 7 words that the CDC is no longer allowed to use. I don't even know if they can do that, but anyway. Those words, listen to them for a minute. Perhaps some of you have read this already. The words are vulnerable, diversity, entitlement, fetus, evidence-based, science-based, transgendered. I want to say this morning that some of those words are at the heart not only of that first Christmas story, but the story in its meaning today. Just think about them for a moment, a few of them. Think about the diversity of those who are vulnerable this year, like Mary and Joseph, searching for a home, searching for shelter. Think about the Rohingya Muslims fleeing. Think about the fact that the Pope couldn't even say their name. He did later. Think about the transgendered youth trying to find home within themselves with little help from society in many places. Think about the people in San Mateo looking for a home who have been displaced because they can't afford their rents. In fact, just on Caltalpa this week, 10 families are going to end up being displaced because their rent is going up 40%. Think about in this moment the North Bay folks and the folks in Southern California wandering without a home due to the fires, those that have lost their home. And it is evidence-based that it is the worst fire in California history this year. Think about the vulnerable here in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, one of the most economically successful places on earth. Evidence-based research this week has shown that 1 in 4 people in Silicon Valley are food insecure. Think about some of the vulnerabilities in our own lives. People just in the last 2 weeks who have lost loved ones. In that first story, that story of God coming among us, this year the message that I have found deep meaning in is that this story is about God trying to find home. God trying to find a place, a room, space in this world. If you are having trouble imagining God, then hear it this way. Love is trying to find home. Home in your life and in mine. Because after all, that is the heart of the Christian message. There was an article in the New York Times this week by a professor named Charles Matthews. It's called White Christianity is in Big Trouble and is its own biggest threat. Perhaps some of you have read that. He goes on to talk about primarily evangelical Christianity and how, in his view, as he's a professor of religion and ethics and of Christian history, how in his view, the readings of the Bible and the teachings of Jesus have gotten warped over time. That in this day and age, Christian has become a political identity. He goes on to talk about these things, and I encourage you to read it. But he says this, for believers in a religion whose scriptures teach compassion, we're a breathtakingly cruel bunch, in his view. But this is what he said that struck me, that I didn't expect where he was going. He says there are many factors, historical, social, and political, that have helped shape white American Christianity into what it is today. But when it comes to keeping us away from the core truths of our faith, I suspect this one error is key. Christians today seemed governed by fear. Theologians as well as psychologists will tell you that there is a spiritual peril in acting out of fear. And fear moves us away from the core of Christianity, which is love. You know, really, fear is the opposite of love. I think that's why the angels say so many times more than anything, they repeat themselves over and over in our text every time they show up. Do not be afraid. And the truth is, beloved community, there is a lot to be afraid of in the future, isn't there? So I ask you to reflect in your life. Where are you experiencing fear? Last week, Amy, in her reflection, asked us to reflect on how much of our percentage of time do we want to be in control. Remember that? How many of you were here last week? That really stuck with me. Anybody hit the high 90s like I did? Anybody as honest as I am, right? And then she said, how much of the percentage of things can you actually control? For her, it was 10%. And she said, that space in between, that 80%, that's where a lot of suffering occurs. Well, I wonder how much percentage of the time we are afraid. And you might say to me, I don't really live in fear. So let me ask it this way. Because if you asked me personally, do you live in fear? I would say absolutely not. I'm not afraid. So let me ask it this way. How much of the time are you worried? How much of the time are you stressed? Guarded? Defended? Negative? All those things I just named, I believe, if you get down underneath, have their root in fear. So the question this morning is, how can you and I invite love into those places? Can you make more room for love? For most of us, our lives are so busy, so filled, so packed, that we have little space to invite love in. The angels say to us, do not be afraid, for love is born. Imagine love born into all those situations we named before. Wouldn't they look different? Love is born this Christmas Eve. Will love be born in your life? Roma is going to sing for us as we come to a close in our Advent season, in the arms of an angel. And I ask as she sings it that you imagine yourself being held by love, and you invite more love in your life.